When the foster system gave up on me, an unexpected inheritance gave me a second chance. For years, the world had told me I was a lost cause, a file in a cabinet, a problem to be managed until I aged out. But what I found buried on a forgotten piece of land wasn't just about a second chance. It was about the first chance I never knew I had. If you've ever felt like the world forgot you or that your story was over before it began, stick around and hit that subscribe button, because this story is for you. The clock on the wall of the common room clicked past midnight, and just like that, I was 18. There was no cake, no party, just the dull hum of the fluorescent lights and the familiar smell of industrial cleaner. For the last 6 years, I'd been a ward of the state, shuffled between homes, each one a little more worn down than the last. Now I was officially an adult, or as my caseworker Ms. Albright had put it with a tired sigh, no longer our problem. Freedom felt less like a gift and more like being pushed off a cliff in the dark. I had $213 in a worn-out envelope, a duffel bag with 3 changes of clothes, and a future that was a perfect, terrifying blank. The other kids in the group home, the ones who were still trapped in the years I'd just escaped, were asleep. I sat alone, tracing the cracks in the linoleum with my eyes, feeling the silence of the place press in on me. This wasn't a home. It was a holding cell, and my sentence was up. The next morning, Ms. Albright called me into her cramped office. It smelled like stale coffee and regret. She slid a thick manila envelope across her cluttered desk. It wasn't my final paperwork. It looked official, heavy. My name and the address of the group home were typed on the front, with the return address of a law firm I'd never heard of, Finch, Covington, and Dunn. "This came for you yesterday," she said, not looking up from her computer screen. "We held it until today. Legally, you couldn't open it as a minor." Her tone was flat, disinterested. To her, it was just one more piece of administrative debris in the life of a kid she was already forgetting. But to me, that envelope felt like a stone dropped into the dead calm water of my life. I had no family. My mother died when I was 12, a sudden brutal illness that tore the world out from under me. My grandfather, her father, was the one who signed the papers. He'd looked at me with eyes I couldn't read, his face a mask of stone, and handed me over to a stranger from social services. I hadn't heard from him since. He'd washed his hands of me, another piece of wreckage from a life he wanted to forget. So who would be sending me a letter from a lawyer? I took the envelope. The paper was thick, expensive. It felt alien in my hands, used to the flimsy, bureaucratic forms that had dictated my existence. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "No idea," Ms. Albright shrugged. "Probably notice of some outstanding family debt you're now responsible for. Wouldn't be the first time. Good luck with that." She finally looked at me, her eyes offering a brief, clinical flicker of something that might have been pity, but was probably just exhaustion. "Your bus pass and final check are on the desk by the door. The bed needs to be stripped before you go. Someone else is moving in this afternoon." The finality of her words was like a door slamming shut. I was being erased. I walked back to the small room I shared with a boy who screamed in his sleep. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the envelope heavy in my lap. For a moment, I was too afraid to open it. Bad news was a language I understood. Good news felt like a trick. My hands trembled as I tore the seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper with a letterhead embossed at the top. The message was brief and formal. It was a summons. "Dear Mr. Leo Vance," it began. The Mr. was so foreign it felt like it belonged to someone else. "This letter is to inform you of the recent passing of your grandfather, Mr. Arthur Vance. As the executor of his estate, I am writing to request your presence at our offices at your earliest convenience to discuss the matter of his last will and testament. Please contact my assistant to schedule an appointment. It was signed by a Mr. Alistair Finch, senior partner. My grandfather was dead. The words didn't seem to connect. The man who had abandoned me, the man I had spent 6 years trying to hate, was gone. And he'd left a will. It had to be a mistake. Or worse, a cruel joke. Like Ms. Albright said, maybe it was a debt. Maybe his final act was to burden me with the ghosts of his own failures. I crumpled the letter in my fist, then just as quickly smoothed it out. It was the only thing I had in the world that wasn't issued by the state. It was a thread, however thin, to a life I'd lost. I picked up my duffel bag, left the bed unstripped, and walked out of the front door of the group home without looking back. The air outside was cold and sharp, and for the first time in 6 years, it was mine to breathe. I was terrified, but as I walked toward the bus stop, the lawyer's letter clutched in my hand. A tiny, unfamiliar feeling began to flicker in my chest. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was just curiosity, and in a life as empty as mine, that was more than enough to keep me moving. The law office of Finch, Covington & Dunn was on the 34th floor of a glass and steel skyscraper that scraped the clouds. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and hushed importance, filled with people in expensive suits who moved with a purpose I couldn't imagine having. I felt like a ghost, a smudge on the polished floor, in my worn-out jeans and thin jacket. The $200 in my pocket felt like Monopoly money after giving my name to a receptionist who looked through me as if I were a pane of glass. I was told to wait. I sat on a leather couch that probably cost more than everything I owned combined, my duffel bag clutched between my knees like a shield. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the corner echoed the passing of a life I didn't understand. Finally, a woman with a severe haircut called my name and led me down a long, silent hallway. The door at the end had a small brass plaque, Alistair Finch. She opened it and gestured for me to enter. The office was lined with books from floor to ceiling. A massive mahogany desk sat in front of a window that offered a dizzying view of the city below, a world I had only ever seen from the ground, looking up. Mr. Finch stood as I entered. He was an older man, tall and thin, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit. His face was sharp and intelligent, his eyes a pale, watchful blue. He didn't smile, but he didn't look unkind either. He looked neutral, like a judge. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice calm and measured. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." I sat, placing my bag on the floor beside me. The chair was so soft, I felt like I was sinking. You said my grandfather is dead." "Yes," he confirmed, sitting back down. He folded his hands on the desk. "Arthur passed away 2 weeks ago, a heart attack. It was very sudden. I was his lawyer for over 20 years, and I am the executor of his will." Silence stretched between us. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't seen Arthur since I was 12. The grief I felt was strange and hollow, a ghost of a loss, not a fresh one. The real loss had happened 6 years ago in that sterile social services office. "Why am I here?" I finally asked. We didn't talk. He gave me away." Mr. Finch's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something moved in his eyes. "He did," he said simply, "and the reasons for that are complicated. We can discuss that, perhaps. But the immediate reason you are here is that Arthur's will is very straightforward. He was not a wealthy man in any conventional sense, but he did have one asset of value, a property, a small farm that has been in your family for generations. He has left it and everything on it to you." The words hung in the air, unreal. a farm. I had a memory, hazy and dreamlike, of being a small boy running through tall grass, the sun on my face, a big red barn, a tire swing hanging from an oak tree. I'd always assumed it was a dream, a story my mind had invented to fill the void. A farm? Correct, Mr. Finch continued, sliding a folder across the desk. It's located in a rural township called Sparrow Creek, about a 4-hour bus ride from here. Approximately 50 acres of land, a farmhouse, and a barn. By law, as of your 18th birthday, it is now yours. He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. However, there are complications. Of course there were. I braced myself for the punchline, the debt Ms. Albright had predicted. The property has fallen into disrepair, he said, opening the folder, and Arthur, in his later years, fell behind on the property taxes, significantly behind. The arrears currently amount to just over $24,000. My stomach dropped. $24,000. He might as well have said $1 million. The $200 in my pocket felt even more pathetic now. So I inherit a debt, I said, the bitterness rising in my throat. That's it? That's what he left me? Not exactly, Mr. Finch said, his gaze steady. He left you the land. The debt is attached to it. If you cannot pay the taxes within the next 90 days, the county will seize the property and sell it at auction. You will receive nothing. He leaned forward slightly. There is, however, another option. A development corporation, Goliath Development, has been trying to acquire the land for some time. It's adjacent to a larger parcel they're developing. They know about the tax situation. They have made a formal offer to purchase the property from you, as is. They will assume the tax debt and, in addition, pay you a sum of $50,000. $50,000! The number was astronomical, incomprehensible. It was more money than I had ever dared to imagine. It was a ticket out, a clean slate. I could go anywhere, start over, and never look back. It was the easy answer, a life raft thrown to a drowning man. I could take it and run, forget the dilapidated farm, forget the grandfather who threw me away, forget everything. So I can just sell it? I asked, my heart pounding. You can, he confirmed. You would sign the papers today. The money would be in an account for you by the end of the week. You would be free and clear. It was tempting. God, it was so tempting. It was the smart thing to do. But then a thought surfaced, quiet and stubborn. That hazy memory of the tire swing, the smell of cut grass, my mother's laughter. Arthur had kept the farm. For all those years he'd held on to it. Why? Why not sell it himself if he was struggling? Why leave it to the grandson he'd discarded? It didn't make sense. It felt like a puzzle, and I was only seeing the edge pieces. What if I don't want to sell? I asked, the words surprising me as much as they seemed to surprise Mr. Finch. He raised an eyebrow. To keep it, you would need to find a way to pay the back taxes. Given your circumstances, that seems unlikely. His tone wasn't cruel, just factual. Is there anything else? I pressed. Did he leave a letter? Anything? Mr. Finch hesitated for a fraction of a second. Arthur was a very private man. His instructions to me were purely legal. However, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, sealed box, no bigger than a shoebox, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. On top was a bus ticket and another smaller envelope. He did leave this. His instructions were that I was to give it to you and only you on your 18th birthday. He said it would explain things. He also insisted I give you this cash for your immediate needs. He pushed the small envelope toward me. I opened it. Inside were 5 crisp $100 bills. I looked at the box, then at the offer from Goliath Development sitting on the desk. $50,000 and a clean break, or a box of secrets and a mountain of debt. My entire life, other people had made choices for me. Social workers, judges, foster parents, my grandfather. They had drawn the map of my life, and I had just walked the lines. This was the first real choice I'd ever had. The smart choice was the money. The logical choice was the money. But my hand reached out and touched the dusty brown paper on the box. It felt like a connection. It felt real. "I want to go there," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I want to see it." Mr. Finch studied my face for a long moment. I expected him to argue, to tell me I was being a fool. Instead, he simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "Very well," he said, pushing the box, the ticket, and the money across the desk. "The bus leaves in 2 hours. The keys to the house are in the box. Arthur's final instructions to me were that if you chose to go to the farm, I was to give you this advice. Don't just look, see." He stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. "Call me when you get there, Mr. Vance. Let me know what you decide." I left his office with the box under my arm, my head spinning. I was walking away from a fortune toward a ruin. I didn't know if I was the biggest fool in the world or if, for the first time, I was finally walking toward home. The bus ride was a slow bleed from gray to green. The city's concrete towers and screeching traffic gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to flat, open highways, and finally to winding country roads, flanked by dense forests and rolling fields. I sat with my forehead pressed against the cool glass of the window, the box from Mr. Finch on the seat beside me, a silent, heavy companion. The $500 felt like a fragile shield in my pocket. It was more money than I'd ever held, yet I knew it was almost nothing compared to the debt that awaited me. With every mile that passed, the city, the only world I really knew, receded, and the magnitude of my decision grew. I was heading toward a place I couldn't remember, left to me by a man I wasn't sure I could forgive. The rhythmic thump of the bus's tires on the pavement was a hypnotic drumbeat pulling memories from the depths. I saw my mother's face, not as the pale, sick woman in the hospital bed, but vibrant and laughing, her hair catching the sunlight as she pushed me on a swing. I could almost smell the honeysuckle she grew by the porch. And I saw my grandfather, Arthur, before he became the stone-faced stranger in the social services office. He was a giant of a man with calloused hands who could fix anything. He smelled of sawdust and soil. He'd taught me how to skip stones on a creek and how to tell the difference between an oak and a maple. These memories were like fragments of a shattered photograph, beautiful but incomplete. They were from a time when my world was whole, before the sickness, before the loss, before I became a file number. Why would the man from those memories give me away? The question had been a dull ache in my chest for 6 years. Now it was a raw, open wound. The bus wheezed to a stop in the center of Sparrow Creek. It wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a few buildings clinging to it. A general store with a rusty tin roof, a post office, a gas station with a single pump, and a boarded-up diner. A handful of houses were scattered down a few side streets. The air was clean and smelled of damp earth and pine. It was quiet. So quiet, it felt loud. There were no sirens, no traffic, no shouting from the room next door, just the whisper of the wind in the tall trees. A man in overalls loading sacks of feed onto a pickup truck glanced at me, then gave a slow, curious nod. I was an outsider, a complete unknown. The feeling was both isolating and liberating. No one here knew my history. No one knew I was the kid the system spat out. Here I was just a boy with a duffel bag and a box. I asked the driver for directions to the Vance property. He pointed down a long, unpaved road that disappeared into the woods. "About 2 miles that way," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Can't miss it. Last place on the road. Hasn't been anyone out there in a long while." The walk was longer than I expected. The gravel road crunched under my worn-out sneakers. The sun was starting to dip below the tree line, casting long, eerie shadows across the path. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. What was I walking into? Finally, the road opened up into a clearing, and I saw it. The farmhouse stood on a small rise, silhouetted against the fading light. It was a two-story wooden structure, once painted white, but now the paint was peeling in long strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. The windows were dark and empty, like vacant eyes. The porch roof sagged on one side, and the whole place seemed to be leaning, as if tired of standing. To the left stood the barn, a massive structure whose red paint had faded to a dusty rose. The grounds were a wilderness of overgrown grass, weeds, and tangled blackberry bushes. It wasn't just neglected, it was abandoned, forgotten. It looked exactly how I felt. My heart sank. This was a ruin, a wreck. The $50,000 I'd walked away from seemed like a cruel joke my own stupidity had played on me. I had traded a fortune for a pile of rotting wood. I almost turned around, right there, ready to walk the 2 miles back to town and call Mr. Finch to tell him I'd made a terrible mistake. But then my eyes caught something. Hanging from the thick branch of a massive oak tree near the house was a single frayed rope swaying gently in the breeze. The tire was gone, but the rope was still there. The tire swing, it was real. This place was real. This was my history, broken and decaying, but real. Taking a deep breath, I pushed through the tall weeds, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the box held tight in my arms. I climbed the rickety steps of the porch, which groaned in protest under my weight. It was time to open the box. I sat on the top step, the wood cool beneath me, and untied the twine. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed newspaper, was a heavy, ornate iron key, a small leather-bound journal, and a thick, sealed envelope with my name, Leo, written on it in a strong, slanted hand. My grandfather's handwriting. I picked up the key. It was cold and solid, a real object that promised entry. I walked to the front door, the paint cracked and blistered around the lock. With a trembling hand, I slid the key into the keyhole. It was stiff, but with a hard turn, there was a loud, grating click. The sound echoed in the twilight quiet. The door swung inward on a long, slow creak, opening into darkness. The air that rushed out was stale and thick with the smell of dust, decay, and something else. Something that smelled like memory. I stood on the threshold, a boy on the edge of a forgotten world, and took my first step inside. The inside of the house was a landscape of ghosts. Every piece of furniture, a sofa, armchairs, a dining table, was draped in a white sheet, making the room look like it was populated by silent, lumpy phantoms. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, dancing in the single beam of light slanting from the dirty window by the door. The air was heavy and still, the silence absolute. It felt like a tomb. I ran a finger along a sheet-covered table, leaving a clean streak in the gray dust. I was an intruder here, a trespasser in someone else's past. My past. The thought was jarring. I had no connection to this place, and yet, legally, it was mine. I moved slowly from room to room. The kitchen was small, with peeling linoleum and a cast-iron stove that looked ancient. A calendar on the wall was turned to July, 6 years ago. The month my mother died. The month I was sent away. It was as if time had stopped in this house, on that exact day. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms. One was clearly my grandfather's, a simple wooden bed frame, a tall wardrobe, a nightstand with a single dusty water glass on it. The other room was smaller. It held a child's bed, a small desk, and a bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks. On the wall, faded rectangles showed where posters had once been tacked up. My room. I remembered a poster of the solar system, the planets glowing in the dark. I touched the empty space on the wall, and for a fleeting moment, I was a little boy again, safe in this room, believing the world was as orderly as the planets orbiting the sun. The feeling vanished as quickly as it came, leaving an ache in its place. Back downstairs, I found the study. It was a small room, dominated by a heavy oak desk and a wall of built-in bookshelves. Unlike the rest of the house, the furniture here wasn't covered. It was as if it had been in recent use. The desk was clear except for a tarnished brass lamp and an old, rotary-style telephone. I sat in the leather chair behind the desk. It creaked loudly in the silence. This was where he must have sat. Arthur. I tried to picture him here, an old man, alone in this silent, decaying house. The image was profoundly sad. Why would he live like this? Why would he let the place fall apart around him? Then I remembered the envelope. I had left the box on the porch. I retrieved it and brought it into the study, sitting back down at the desk. My hands were shaking again as I picked up the thick envelope addressed to me. This was it. The explanation Mr. Finch had mentioned. For 6 years, I had built a story in my head. My grandfather was cold. He didn't want me. He had discarded me like trash. I was afraid of what this letter would say, afraid it would confirm my worst fears. But I was more afraid of not knowing. I slid my finger under the flap and broke the seal. Inside were several pages, filled with that same strong, slanted handwriting. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dearest Leo," it started. The words were a shock. I had never imagined him using a term of endearment. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have come home. I hope you have come home. I know you have questions. I know you must hate me. I have lived with that knowledge every day for 6 years, and I suppose it is a fitting punishment. I need you to understand. I need you just once to see the world through my eyes. When your mother, my beautiful, brave daughter, passed away, I was shattered. But my grief was a luxury I could not afford. You were 12 years old, and you were in terrible danger." Danger? What danger? We were poor, but we were safe, weren't we? "Before you were born," the letter continued, "your father got himself into trouble. He was a good man at heart, Leo, but he was reckless. He fell in with some very dangerous people, a criminal syndicate that operated in the shadows of the city. He borrowed money from them, a lot of money, thinking he could make a quick score and pay it back. He couldn't. When he died in that workplace accident, it was no accident. They made an example of him, and the debt he owed didn't die with him. It fell to your mother. She spent her entire life trying to pay them off, working 2 jobs, always looking over her shoulder. The stress is what made her sick, I'm sure of it. It wore her down until there was nothing left. I had to stop reading. My head was spinning. A criminal syndicate my father murdered? This sounded like something out of a movie, not my life. My mother had always told me my father was a construction worker who died when a scaffold collapsed. A tragic accident. Had she been lying to protect me? I forced myself to keep reading. When she died, the debt fell to me as your guardian. But it wasn't just about the money anymore. They saw you. They saw a way to have leverage over me, a way to ensure I would pay, or a way to get something else they wanted. A boy is a powerful tool for a man with no morals. They made it clear that you were now part of the equation. I saw the way they looked at you. I heard the whispers. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I could not protect you here, not on my own, so I made an impossible choice. I could keep you with me and watch you live in fear, always a target, or I could make you disappear. I chose to make you disappear. The foster care system, for all its flaws, was the one place they would never think to look for you. It was a place to hide you in plain sight. Handing you over to that social worker was the hardest thing I have ever done. It broke my heart, Leo, but I believed it was the only way to save your life. The letter fell from my hands. I stared at the wall, at the faded wallpaper, my mind reeling. abandonment. For 6 years, that one word had defined my life. It was the foundation of who I was. And in a few paragraphs, he had torn it all down. It wasn't abandonment, it was protection. A brutal, desperate, heartbreaking act of protection. He hadn't thrown me away. He had hidden me. I leaned forward and buried my face in my hands, and for the first time since my mother died, I cried. I cried for the little boy who thought he'd been rejected. I cried for the mother I never really knew, and I cried for the old man who had sacrificed his own heart to keep me safe. After a long time, I picked up the letter again. There was more. I have spent the last 6 years living like a hermit, saving every penny, trying to gather enough to pay them off for good. But there is another problem, a new threat. A company called Goliath Development wants this land. They are relentless. They are not the same people your father dealt with, but they are cut from the same cloth. They know the history of this place, and they are trying to use it, and the tax debt they know I have, to force me out. Do not trust them, Leo. Their offers are poison. In the study, in the bottom right drawer of the desk, you will find a metal box. It contains my life's work. It is the beginning of your real inheritance. This house, this land. It is more than just property. It is our story. It is your home, if you choose it. The choice is now yours. Your loving grandfather, Arthur. I sat back, the letter resting on the desk. My entire world had been rewritten. The hate I had carried for so long was gone, replaced by a profound, aching sadness and a sliver of understanding. He hadn't been a monster. He'd been a soldier fighting a war I never knew existed. I looked at the bottom drawer of the desk. It was locked. Of course it was. Nothing about this was going to be easy. I tried the iron key from the front door, but it didn't fit. I pulled out the small, leather-bound journal that had been in the box. I hadn't looked at it yet. I opened it. It wasn't a diary. It was full of sketches, diagrams of woodworking joints, notes on crop rotation, and on the first page, a detailed drawing of a small, intricately carved wooden bird. Underneath it was a single sentence: "The key is in the songbird's heart." It was a riddle. My grandfather, the man I remembered as simple and direct, had left me a trail of secrets, and I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I had to follow it. This was no longer about a debt or a piece of land. It was about uncovering the truth of a life that was sacrificed for mine. If you've made it this far, maybe you've had a moment like this in your own life, a moment where everything you thought was true gets turned completely upside down. It's terrifying, but it's also a strange kind of gift, isn't it? It's a chance to see the world and yourself with new eyes. I get a lot of messages from people in this community who are rebuilding their lives from scratch, and your stories, they keep me going. So if this is hitting you, if you're finding a piece of your own story in mine, let me know in the comments. We're all in this together. Now, let's get back to the story and the search for that songbird. The phrase, "The key is in the songbird's heart," echoed in my mind. It was poetic, cryptic, and maddeningly vague. I scanned the study again, my eyes searching for anything that looked like a bird. There were no carvings on the desk, no paintings on the wall, no figurines on the shelves, just books, dust, and the heavy silence of the house. I thought back to my childhood, to those fragmented memories of this place. Did Arthur carve wood? I remembered his calloused hands, the constant presence of a pocket knife, the way he could turn a fallen branch into a whistle. Yes, he carved. I had a faint memory of a collection of small wooden animals he kept on the mantelpiece above the fireplace in the main room. I left the study and went back into the living area, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. The fireplace was at the far end of the room, a large structure made of river stones. The mantelpiece above it was thick and dark with soot, and there, Lined up and coated in a thick layer of dust was a row of small hand-carved wooden animals, a deer, a fox, a bear, an owl, and at the very end, a small, elegant songbird, its head cocked as if listening. My heart quickened. I reached up and carefully lifted it from the mantel. It was beautifully made, the grain of the wood mimicking the texture of feathers. It was smooth and light in my palm. But how could a key be inside it? It was solid wood. I shook it gently. Nothing rattled. I twisted the head, the wings, the base. Nothing moved. It was just a simple carving. Disappointment washed over me. Was I wrong? Was the journal entry just a sentimental phrase, not a literal instruction? I was about to put it back when I noticed something. On the underside of the base, almost invisible, was a tiny seam, a faint line that didn't follow the grain of the wood. I ran my thumbnail over it. It was a perfect circle. I pressed on it, and with a soft click, the base popped off. It was a tiny, hollow compartment, and inside, nestled in a small bit of cotton, was a tiny, ornate brass key. It was no bigger than my thumbnail, the kind of key you might use for a diary or a small jewelry box. The songbird's heart. He had hidden it so cleverly. I felt a surge of connection to him, an appreciation for the mind of this man who thought in riddles and secrets. He wasn't just protecting me, he was testing me, guiding me, making sure I was the one to find this. I rushed back to the study, the tiny key clutched in my hand. I knelt down and inserted it into the lock on the bottom drawer of the desk. It fit perfectly. With a turn, the lock clicked open. I pulled the drawer out. Inside was a heavy gray metal lockbox, the kind you'd use for petty cash. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. The contents were stark and sobering. On one side was a stack of bundled cash held together with rubber bands. I counted it quickly. $5,000. A significant amount of money, but nowhere near the $24,000 I needed for the taxes. On the other side were documents, years of bank statements showing small, regular deposits and almost no withdrawals. A deed to the property in Arthur Vance's name, and underneath it all, a sheaf of letters. They were from Goliath Development. The first letter was dated a year ago. It was a friendly, almost neighborly inquiry about purchasing the land. The offer was low, but the tone was polite. The second, dated a few months later, was more insistent. The offer was slightly higher. The third, fourth, and fifth letters grew progressively more aggressive. The offers increased, but the tone became threatening. They mentioned his financial difficulties. They referenced the unfortunate history associated with the property. They knew things they shouldn't know. The last letter was practically an ultimatum. It made a final, much higher offer, but warned that if he didn't accept, they would use their influence with the county to expedite the foreclosure process. They were trying to strong-arm him, to steal the land from him, using his debt as a weapon. My grandfather hadn't just been a lonely old man. He'd been under siege. He was fighting a two-front war, one against the ghosts of my father's past and another against the corporate predators of the present. And he was doing it all alone. The $5,000 in the box? It wasn't a solution. It was a war chest. It was what he'd managed to scrape together to keep fighting. The weight of his struggle settled on me, heavy and suffocating. This inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a battlefield. And he had just handed me the flag. I felt a surge of anger, not at him, but at them, at the faceless corporation that saw this land not as a home, not as a legacy, but as a square on a map to be acquired and monetized. They had tormented an old man, and now they were coming for me. Mr. Finch's words came back to me. Their offer is $50,000. It was a bribe. They weren't offering me a lifeline. They were offering me 30 pieces of silver to betray my grandfather's fight. But the letter had said this box was only the beginning of my inheritance. and it had warned me about the barn. I looked out the study window into the deepening twilight. The barn stood there, a dark, hulking silhouette against the purple sky. It looked ominous, foreboding. Arthur's letter had said what I would find there would be difficult. I wasn't sure I could handle any more difficult truths today. I was exhausted, emotionally raw, and overwhelmed. I needed to rest, to think. I took one of the blankets from the linen closet upstairs. It smelled of mothballs and thyme, and wrapped it around myself on the sheet-covered sofa. I didn't bother to light a lamp. The darkness felt appropriate. As I drifted into a fitful sleep, my dreams were a chaotic mix of my mother's smile, my father's shadowy form, and the cold, relentless logo of Goliath Development. I woke up hours later, the moon high in the sky, casting pale, skeletal shadows through the dirty windows. The house was cold, and I felt a profound sense of loneliness, but it was mixed with something new. Determination. I had to know the rest of the story. I had to go to the barn. I found an old oil lantern in the kitchen pantry. After a few tries, I got it lit, its warm, flickering glow pushing back the oppressive darkness. The flame cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the house feel both alive and haunted. Carrying the lantern, I walked out the back door and toward the barn. The night air was cold and crisp. Crickets chirped in the tall grass, a lonely chorus. The barn was even bigger up close than it had looked from the house. Its massive sliding door was slightly ajar. I put my shoulder against the heavy wood and pushed. It groaned and scraped along its rusted track, opening just enough for me to slip through. The air inside was thick with the smell of old hay, dust, and dry rot. The lantern light cut a weak circle in the vast, cathedral-like darkness. High above, massive wooden beams crisscrossed in the gloom, and I could see patches of starry sky through holes in the roof. The main floor was cluttered with old, rusted farm equipment, a plow, a thresher, pieces of a tractor, all draped in cobwebs as thick as cotton. It was a museum of forgotten labor. My grandfather's letter hadn't given me a specific location, just a warning. Where would a man who thought in riddles hide the most important secret of his life? I started to search, my lantern held high. I ran my hands along the walls, tapped on the wooden planks, kicked at piles of old hay. I searched for hours, my hope dwindling with each passing minute. The barn was huge, and a secret could be hidden anywhere. I was about to give up, to wait for daylight, when my light caught something on the floor. In the far corner, partially hidden under a pile of rotting canvas tarps, the floorboards looked different. While the rest of the floor was made of wide, rough-hewn planks, this small section was made of newer, smoother wood, and one of the planks had a small, semicircular notch cut into its side, just big enough to fit a finger. It was a finger pull. My heart started to pound. I dropped to my knees and cleared away the tarp. I hooked my finger into the notch and pulled. The board lifted easily. It wasn't nailed down. Beneath it was a dark, square hole. I lowered the lantern. The light illuminated a space about 3 feet deep, and at the bottom sat another box. This one was different. It was a military-style footlocker made of dark green metal with heavy-duty latches on the front. It looked solid, secure, and meant to last. It looked like a tomb. It was heavy, but I managed to haul it out of the hole and drag it to the center of the barn floor. The latches were stiff with rust, but I pried them open with the end of a nearby shovel. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling, and I lifted the heavy lid. I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The footlocker was filled almost to the brim with cash. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills, bundled in neat, tight bricks. It was an astronomical amount of money, far, far more than the $24,000 needed for the taxes. It looked like a fortune. But that wasn't all. On top of the money sat one final envelope, thicker than the last, with Leo written on the front. This was it. the final piece of the puzzle. With a sense of dread and reverence, I opened it and began to read the last words my grandfather would ever speak to me. Leo, the final letter began, the handwriting a little shakier than the first, as if written with a great weight on his mind. If you have found this, then you have followed the path I laid for you. You have seen the ruin I have allowed this place to become, and you have understood the first part of the truth. Now you must understand the rest, and you must forgive me, not for sending you away, but for the life you were born into. I looked from the letter to the stunning amount of cash in the footlocker. It had to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where had it come from? The money you see here, the letter continued as if reading my mind, is not my life's savings. I could have worked for 1,000 years and never saved this much. This money is a ghost. It is the original sum your father borrowed, plus 2 decades of their vile interest. After your mother died and I sent you away, I made a deal with the devil. I contacted the people your father was indebted to. I told them I would pay back every last cent, but it would take time. And in return, they would leave you, my only grandson, entirely alone. They would erase any record of your existence from their books. You would be a ghost to them forever. They agreed. They are businessmen after all, and a guaranteed payment is better than a risky asset like a child. So for the past 6 years I have lived a double life. To the world I was a poor old recluse, letting his family farm fall to ruin. But in secret I worked. I took on clandestine jobs, using skills I haven't used in 50 years. I was a master carpenter and a mechanic in my youth, and there is always a market for skilled hands that don't ask questions. I worked for cash, off the books, pouring every dollar into this box. I lived on almost nothing. I let the house crumble, the fields go wild, all to maintain the illusion of poverty. It was a performance, Leo, a long, lonely 6-year performance to buy your freedom. This money was never meant for me. It was their money. I was simply collecting it, holding it for the day I could finally pay the debt and sever their claim on our family forever. I stared at the bricks of cash. It wasn't an inheritance. It was ransom money. My grandfather had spent the last years of his life in self-imposed poverty and isolation, working in the shadows, not to get rich, but to pay off a gangster's loan to save a grandson he couldn't even speak to. The sheer scale of his sacrifice was staggering. It was a love so fierce and so total, it had required him to destroy his own life, to appear as a monster in my eyes, all to build a wall around me. The plan, he wrote, was to have it all ready by your 18th birthday. I would make the payment, the debt would be cleared, and then I would come for you. I would bring you home. I would sit you down at the kitchen table and I would explain everything, and I would spend the rest of my days trying to earn your forgiveness. But my heart, it seems, had other plans. It gave out before I could finish the job. So now the final step falls to you. The money is here. All of it. In this box is also a name and a number. It is the contact for the man I have been dealing with. You are to call him, arrange a drop, and give him this footlocker, all of it. Do not be tempted to keep it, Leo. This money is cursed. It is stained with the blood of your father and the tears of your mother. It will bring you nothing but misery. Your inheritance is not this money. Your inheritance is the freedom that comes after this money is gone. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the letter. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had gathered the entire sum. He had won. He just hadn't lived long enough to see it. But his victory was now my burden. I was supposed to contact a dangerous criminal and hand over a fortune. The thought was terrifying. Once the debt is paid, the letter concluded, you will be truly free. What you do then is up to you. The tax bill on the farm is real. The threat from Goliath development is real. I have left you a home, but I have not left it to you in a condition that makes it easy to keep. There is another smaller stash of money, my own clean money, hidden in the old well house. It should be enough to settle the taxes and perhaps fix the roof. It is a humble start. You could sell the farm, take the developer's money. No one would blame you. It would be the easy path. Or you could stay. You could fight for this land. You could rebuild what has fallen. You could make this place a home again. I cannot make that choice for you. A man must choose his own home. Whatever you decide, know this. Every sacrifice I made, every lonely day and sleepless night was for you. I love you, Leo. I have always loved you. Now go and live. Live freely. Your grandfather, Arthur. I let the letter fall. The lantern cast a halo of light around the open footlocker, the money gleaming with a sinister allure. The entire story was laid bare. The abandonment, the neglect, the debt, the secrets. It was all part of one epic hidden act of love. My grandfather hadn't left me a problem to solve. He had left me a victory to claim. He had cleared the board of all the old enemies. But in their place, a new one stood waiting. Goliath development. And I was standing at a crossroads, with a ghost's fortune at my feet, a crumbling home at my back, and a choice that would define the rest of my life. Just as the sun began to rise, casting pale fingers of light through the holes in the barn roof, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but some instinct made me answer. Hello? Mr. Leo Vance. The voice was slick, professional, and oozing with false sincerity. Who is this? I asked, my voice hoarse. My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm a senior acquisitions manager with Goliath Development, he said. I'm calling to follow up on the offer we extended to you via your lawyer, Mr. Finch. I understand you've now had a chance to see the property. A bit of a fixer-upper, wouldn't you say? He chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. I looked around the decaying barn, then back toward the leaning farmhouse. You could say that. Precisely, he said smoothly. Which is why we'd like to amend our offer. We're prepared to be very generous to help you move on from this unfortunate situation. We understand the emotional and financial burdens you've inherited, so we are formally offering you $250,000. Plus, of course, we will handle the outstanding tax liability. The paperwork is ready. We can have the money in your account by tomorrow afternoon. Think about it, Mr. Vance. $250,000. A fresh start anywhere in the world. No more debts, no more dilapidated buildings, no more bad memories. The offer hung in the air, stunning in its audacity. $250,000. It was 5 times their original offer. It was life-changing money. It was everything I had never had. A golden key that could unlock any door I wanted. I could take that money, hand over the cursed footlocker to the criminals, and just disappear. I could go to college, travel, buy a car, a small apartment. I could build a life of comfort and security, far away from Sparrow Creek and its ghosts. It was the logical choice. It was the safe choice. It was the future my grandfather had fought so hard to give me, a future free from all of this. He had even said it himself. No one would blame you. I looked at the footlocker at my feet, the cursed money. Then I looked at the letter in my hand. Your inheritance is the freedom that comes after this money is gone. He wanted me to be free. But what did freedom mean? Did it mean running away, or did it mean having the ability to stand your ground? Mr. Vance, are you there? Thorne's voice crackled with impatience. I'm here, I said slowly, my mind racing. I thought of my grandfather living in squalor, working in secret, his heart giving out before he could see his victory. I thought of Goliath Development circling like vultures trying to bully an old man into giving up his home. They saw this place as dirt, marked as an asset, as a number on a balance sheet. They didn't see the tire swing or the songbird carving or the calendar still turned to July. They didn't see the story. My grandfather hadn't just saved money. He had saved a place. He had held on to this last piece of our family, this anchor in the world, through everything. Selling it would be like spitting on his grave. It would mean his sacrifice was only for my financial gain. It would mean letting the bullies win. The $250,000 felt dirty, like a bribe to look the other way, while they tore down the last monument to a man who had given everything for me. My grandfather's letter had given me a choice. He had cleared the path for me to leave, but he had also cleared the path for me to stay. He had given me the tools to do either, the cursed money to clear the old debt, the clean money in the well house to clear the new one. The final choice was about who I wanted to be. Was I the boy who ran, or was I Arthur Vance's grandson? "Mr. Thorne," I said, and my voice was clearer and stronger than it had ever been in my life. "Thank you for your offer, but the answer is no. The property is not for sale." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. I don't think you understand. Mr. Vance, this is a very generous one-time offer. You have a massive tax bill due in less than 90 days. That farm is worthless as it stands." "It's not worthless to me," I said. The words felt true, solid. I could feel the ground beneath my feet. "I'm keeping it." "You're making a huge mistake, kid," he snarled, the fake sincerity gone, replaced by pure venom. "A huge mistake. We will get that land, one way or another." He hung up. I stood there in the quiet of the barn, the phone still pressed to my ear. The threat was real. The fight wasn't over, but I wasn't afraid. For the first time, I felt a sense of purpose. I knew what I had to do. I closed the lid of the footlocker, then I walked out of the barn and toward the old stone well house I'd seen near the edge of the woods. The door was swollen shut, but I put my shoulder into it and forced it open. Inside, tucked into a loose stone in the wall, was a small canvas bag. It was heavy with coins and bills. My grandfather's clean money, his real gift. It was the start of everything. My choice was made. I wasn't running. I was staying. I was going to fight. I was home. The days that followed were a blur of motion and purpose. My first call was to Mr. Finch. I told him I was rejecting Goliath's offer and that I intended to pay the back taxes. He was silent for a long moment, and I could practically hear him shaking his head in his quiet marble office. "Leo," he said, his voice laced with concern, "this is unwise. You have an opportunity for a clean start. Don't throw it away on sentiment." "It's not just sentiment, Mr. Finch," I replied, my voice steady. "It's my home. My grandfather fought for this place. I'm not going to be the one who surrenders it. I have the funds for the taxes." I didn't tell him where the funds came from. I didn't tell him about the footlocker or the cursed money or the deal with the devils from my father's past. That was a secret I had to carry alone. He sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "Very well, if you are determined, I will handle the payment to the county. It will clear your title. But be warned, Goliath Development will not take this well. They play rough." "I know," I said. "Tell them the Vance family isn't selling." My next task was far more daunting. I had to deal with the footlocker. Following Arthur's final instructions, I used a burner phone I bought at the general store to call the number from his letter. A gruff, toneless voice answered on the first ring. I didn't give my name. I just said, "I'm calling on behalf of Arthur Vance. The account is settled." There was a pause. "Where?" the voice asked. I gave him the coordinates to a remote, abandoned quarry miles from Sparrow Creek. "Midnight. Leave the package and walk away. Don't look back." The line went dead. That night, under a moonless sky, I drove out in my grandfather's rusted, barely running pickup truck. the footlocker heavy in the truck bed. I left it on a rock as instructed, my heart pounding in my chest. I got back in the truck and I drove away. I didn't look back. As I pulled onto the main road, I saw headlights approaching the quarry in my rearview mirror. A wave of cold fear washed over me, but I kept driving. I had kept my grandfather's promise. The debt was paid, the ghosts were banished. With the clean money from the well house, I paid Mr. Finch's fee and settled the $24,000 tax bill. I had just under $7,000 left. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a start. It was everything. I began the slow, back-breaking work of reclaiming the farm. I started with the house. I tore off the sheet-draped shrouds, letting the light in. I scrubbed floors, patched walls, and reglazed windows. I fixed the sagging porch roof with wood salvaged from a collapsed shed. Every repaired board, every clean pane of glass felt like a victory. The work was exhausting. My hands, soft from years of institutional idleness, were soon covered in blisters and calluses. My muscles ached constantly. There were days I would collapse onto my mattress, too tired to even eat, thinking about the $250,000 I had turned down, the easy life I could have had. But then I would wake up, the sun streaming through a window I had cleaned myself, and I would feel a sense of pride, of ownership, that no amount of money could buy. The town of Sparrow Creek watched me with a quiet, cautious curiosity. I was a regular at the general store, buying nails, wood putty, and groceries. The woman behind the counter, a kind-faced lady named Martha, started calling me by name. The man from the feed store, who I learned was named Earl, would give me a nod as I drove past in the old pickup. One afternoon, an elderly neighbor from a farm down the road, Mr. Henderson, stopped by. He'd known my grandfather. He leaned on the fence, watching me wrestle with a stubborn, overgrown hedge. "Arthur was a good man," he said, his voice raspy. "Got quiet in his last years. Sad what happened to this place. Glad to see someone's bringing it back." He didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. He just saw the work I was doing. The next day, he left a basket of fresh vegetables on my porch. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. I wasn't just an outsider anymore. I was a neighbor. One evening, while cleaning out the last of the clutter from the study, I found a small, forgotten photo album wedged behind a bookshelf. It was filled with pictures of my mother as a girl, growing up on this farm. There she was, grinning with missing teeth, holding a kitten in the barn. There she was as a teenager, posing proudly with my grandfather next to a prize-winning pumpkin. And on the last page, there was a photo I had never seen before. It was of my grandfather and my mother, standing on the porch of this very house. She was pregnant with me. Her hand was on her belly, and she was looking at my grandfather with such love. He had his arm around her, and he was smiling. It wasn't the grim, stone-faced man from my memory. It was the man from the tire swing, the man who smelled of sawdust and soil. His eyes were full of hope. I carefully removed the photo from the album and placed it on the mantelpiece, right next to the carved songbird. The house was still broken and the future was still uncertain, but for the first time it was filled not with ghosts, but with family. Months have passed. Winter is approaching and the air has a sharp bite to it. The farmhouse is no longer a ruin. It's a work in progress. The roof is patched, the windows are clean, and a thin curl of smoke rises from the chimney every night. The fields are still wild, but I've cleared a small patch for a garden next spring. The fight with Goliath development isn't over. They send letters, legal threats, but they have no leverage now. The land is mine, free and clear. It will be a long fight, but I am not alone. I have the quiet support of my neighbors and the strength I inherited from a man who taught me that some things are worth fighting for. I've learned that an inheritance isn't always about money or property. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can be given is a story. My grandfather didn't leave me a fortune. He left me a history to understand and a choice to make. He taught me that home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you build. It's a place you defend. It's the ground you decide to stand on when the world wants to push you over. He gave me back my own story, and it's a story I am still writing, every day, with every nail I hammer and every seed I plan to sow. So I want to ask you, what have you inherited? It might not be a farm or a secret box of cash. Maybe it's a story you were told about yourself that you're ready to rewrite. Maybe it's a challenge that feels impossible, but it's also an opportunity to discover who you really are. The most important legacies are the ones that force us to choose, to fight, to build. They are the legacies that turn us into the people we were meant to become. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please consider subscribing and joining our community. This channel is for everyone who is fighting for their own piece of ground. Share your story in the comments below. Tell me about the home you are building, the battle you are fighting, the second chance you are claiming for yourself. Because your story matters, and you are not alone.